Hello everyone. In Excel Lab 2, we will be covering if statements, and we'll do the if statements. We'll start pretty basic with our basic just if statement and what an if statement means. Then what we'll be doing is we'll be nesting the if statement. By nesting, I mean you throw other formulas within the if statement. And what we'll show today is how we can use our logical formulas from last lab, the and the or, the logical formulas, and we'll nest those in an if statement. We'll also talk about the count function. The count function is reserved for quantitative data, for numerical data, but if we want to count values that are qualitative as well, we can use the COUNTIF function. The COUNTIF function allows you to define a criteria. COUNTIFs allows you to define more than one criteria, which is something we'll look at today. We'll review the idea of referencing, and then along with COUNTIF, we will talk about SUMIF. If you're that is when you're going to add a range based on a certain criteria. There's actually another function called SUMIFs, plural. You can define more than one criteria. And there's also average if, where you take the average of a data set dependent upon a certain criteria. And again, we won't talk about it today, but average ifs, where you can define more than one criteria. Some of these functions we do in the next Excel course. If you were to take MGQ 408, we go deeper into some of these functions. So for today, in this first worksheet titled If, we will go over all these functions, and then lastly, we will create a Pareto bar chart. We'll talk a little bit about the qualities, of a professional chart, and we will talk about the pie chart. The pie chart is very overused in data visualization, should only be used for relative frequencies, for percents, and honestly should only be used if there's 5 or fewer categories. I would say between 3 and 5 categories, actually, as it says here, where one of the categories is at least a third of the pie. Way too often a pie chart is used when it should not be used, when it would be better to just use a bar chart. So we'll go through this whole worksheet, and then we'll go to the lookups worksheet, where we'll talk about some great skills. Now, the lookup is a great formula to know how to use and to impress people with your knowledge of it. There is the VLOOKUP, there is the HLOOKUP, and then we're going to talk about 2 that are called just the plain lookup. So we'll go over those. Okay, so let's start up. We start in our worksheet. Remember, we have an entire workbook here, and we have 2 worksheets. We have the if worksheet and we have the lookups worksheet. If you recall from the first lab, you are going to enter formulas exactly as I enter them so that you are graded appropriately. If you enter your formulas exactly as I do, we won't have any issues. So what we're going to do first is we have here in this data set, we have region, units, and revenue. And let me see, if I put my cursor here in cell A3, you can do this as well if you want. If I put my cursor here in cell A3, I know I'm in A3 because here it shows I'm in cell A3. And then I just press with my keyboard, I press Shift Control down and press all of them at the same, and hold all of them down at the same time. So Shift, keep holding Shift down, then Control, keep holding Control down, and then down. It will go all the way down to the bottom of the data set. So assuming there are no breaks in the data. If there are breaks in the data, it'll go to the first break in the data. In this case, it would be a empty row. If I had an empty row in the data, it would go down to that first break. So I can see there's 202, actually there's 200, and that's down here as a count, right? There's 200 rows of data here. And the reason there's only 200, even though I end up in row 202, is if I Shift Control up, I can see that the data doesn't start till A3. So that's why there's 200 rows of data, and I have these 3 columns of data. Now, likewise, I can be in cell A3 and Shift Control right, and it takes me to the end of my data set. Notice it didn't take me all the way over to column E because the data is empty here in column D. So that's what I was talking about when you have a break in the data. So if I Shift Control right and then down, whoops, sorry, I did that too many times. Here we go. If I Shift Control right and then down, it will grab all of the data it sees as a continuous loop. Okay, so now into the lesson. What are we going to define if for the criterion meets? Well, what we're going to use here is we're going to say that our revenue meets whatever criteria meets the criteria for us if the revenue is above $80. So if the revenue is above $80, we want to say meets. Otherwise, we want it to say does not meet. So here's how we would do that. We'll put equals if, and you do not need the capital I and F. You could put lowercase I and F, and Excel would default to capital. Now we need a logical test. So we need some either inequality or equality or cell reference, but we need a logical test. That's our and, our or, another statement, another inequality. The logical test here is going to be if the revenue is greater than or equal to 80. So we're going to say if the revenue is greater than or equal to 80, notice there's no spaces, then we want Excel to define that revenue as meets. Now, here's what you want to do. You want to use quotes because this is text. For meets, let's just put, so that there's no confusion, let's just put the entire word in lowercase. And if everybody follows the same, then what will happen is there won't be any questions in grading. So we're going to put in quotes the word meets and then a comma. Well, that's the value if it's true. So if I go back here and put my cursor in the word meets, you see that this is highlighted value, it's true, if true. So if my value, my revenue in this case, because that's what we're referencing, is at least is greater than or equal to, is at least 80, I do not need the dollar sign. If it's at least 80, actually I don't want the dollar sign. Then Excel is going to come back with the word meets. It's going to populate cell D3 with the word meets. But if the value's false, so in other words, false would be less than 80 in this case, we're going to put does space not space meet. All lowercase, end quote, end parenthesis. Now the if statement works when we have a binary result. Binary meaning 2. So our result would be either one of two options, meets or does not meet. Once we have more than two options, we have to do what's called nest the if within another if. So we nest if functions within if functions. Not something we're going to do today, but just letting you know that you can use an if function if you have more than two results. So let's see what happens here. We end up with does not meet. Look how this overlaps. Just go up to column D and put your cursor on the D, select column D, go over to the edge and double click, and Excel will auto format. Well, that makes sense. 4950 does not exceed 80, so does not meet. Now, my referencing will work because I have C3 here, and if I move my formula down, let's just move it down 1, you'll see the C3 should move down to C4. So that works. There is no need to put any referencing around our cell because we'll just move down accordingly. So let's not reference it at all. You should have exactly as I have, if C3 greater than or equal to 80, comma, quote, meets, all lowercase, quote, comma, quote, does space, not space, meet, quote, parenthesis, enter. Now let's double click in the bottom right corner. Because we do not have a break in our data, it will populate down to row 202. Oops, sorry, I had to start. I already did one of them, I forgot. So now I'll again double click, and there we go. We see the values that meet are those that exceed 80. Take a peek at what meets and what does not meet. So that if I were to change 45.90 to, let's say, $90, it would change to meets. I'm going to undo that, Control Z. Control Z undoes that so I have my original data. So you can see now we're populated all the way to the bottom of our data set, and the last entry being over $131, so it does meet. And now, if we want to say the person has a bonus, let's say that a bonus is when the revenue both meets, so greater than or equal to 80, and the units sold are more than, let's define it as more than 60. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, that's how we nest. We're going to use our logical and that we learned in the last lab. So let's use our equals if. And now, right now, we need to enter the and command. So if our logical test is more than one test, and if both need to be true, you use and. If only one needs to be true, you use or. I have two logical tests. You could have 5, you could have 4, you could have 3. You would nest them all within one and or function. Because see, we can put logical 1, logical 2, dot, 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 dot. There can be as many logical tests nested in our and function. We're going to use the fact that our units, so in cell B3, and again, we don't need any referencing, if B3 is greater than, this time, is greater than 60, so if the units sold are greater than 60, comma kind of translates to and our revenue, cell C3, is greater than or equal to 80, we had said. Now that's it. I only have 2 logical functions for this and. If I had another, I would now enter another logical function with a comma, and you can see logical 3 highlighted. But I don't, so let's take that comma away. You should have entered just as I do, with no spaces, equals if, parenthesis, and parenthesis, B3 greater than 60, comma, C3 greater than or equal to 80, parenthesis. Now our and function is done. See, now we're in the if function again. So that is our logical test. Let's hit the comma. Now what do we want to put if that's true? So if B3 is greater than 60 and C3 is greater than or equal to 80, let's return the word bonus. To return text, we need the quotes, and I'll type the word bonus, end quote. But what if it's false? Well, if it's false, let's not put no bonus. Let's just leave it blank. How do you leave blank? To leave blank, you put a space. How do you put a space? Well, you'd put empty quotes. So a quote, 1 space. Oh, I hit the wrong key. Sorry about that. Just hit no. Goes out of that. There we go. Quote, space, another quote, parenthesis. So what I have here is first I have equals, because we need equals for our formula. Equals if, parenthesis, and parenthesis, I chose cell B3, greater than 60, comma, chose cell C3, greater than or equal to 80, parenthesis, comma, quote, bonus, all lowercase, quote, comma, quote, 1 space, another quote, parenthesis. Let's see what happens. I have what appears to be an empty, but it's really, there's a character there. It's a space. But that's because, of course, the revenue does not exceed 80 and the units sold do not exceed 60. Does anyone earn a bonus? Let's double click and find out. Oh, there's a few. So here in the western region, we have a bonus because our units sold exceed 60 and the amount is greater than or equal to 80. We have another bonus here in the Midwest region. So we do have some bonuses, as you can see, in our data set. So let's see what happens here. Let's get a total count of our data. So now we've used the if command. We've nested the and command in the if command. Now let's talk about how we use the count command. Well, the count command will only count quantitative information. So let me just show you. If I tried to count the regions by entering count and then grabbing cell A3, and you can see over here, put A3. And then once I'm in A3, I can use my quick tool to do shift control down. And then I can hit the parenthesis and enter. Look what happens. It says there's nothing there in that column. Well, we know there's information there, and we know, in fact, that there are 200 values. But the count command will only count quantitative data. So if I'm going to use the count command, I'd have to move this over to a column that contains numbers. So move yours over to column B. So you should have equals count B3 semicolon B202. And we need to have exactly that. And you should see 200. So make sure you have as I have, and you'll have a result of 200. Now, what if we want to specifically count how many bonuses we have? How could we count the word bonus? Well, let's see if this works. Let's use the count if. Count if, and notice I didn't type that in capital letters, and that's okay. It will revert to capital letters. Count if, and what's the range where we would find the word bonus? Well, it would be here in column E. So let's select column E, and then I want you to shift control down so that it grabs the entire column of information. And then what you can do to pop yourself back up to where we were is you hit the F4 key right now. And what the F4 key does is absolute reference your column E. Now, if you didn't want that absolute reference, we could just toggle through and take it off. So let's do that. Toggle through the F4 key on a PC. Some of you may have to use the Alt F4 key. It depends on your computer. But the function 4 key will toggle through your different types of referencing. So you should have equals count if, parenthesis, E3, colon, E202, comma, and what's our criteria? Well, our criteria is going to be the word bonus, which is already typed over here. So let's just grab cell G6 and see if this works. Notice the capital B on bonus and the lowercase b. And parenthesis, enter. It does work. I want you to see that whether you have your capital, the lowercase, or uppercase doesn't make a difference. Excel will still recognize the word bonus. Just to prove it to you, if I change this to a lowercase b and hit enter, I still have 9. So whether we have that capitalized, it's not case sensitive. So it recognized that there were 9 regions that received a bonus at these levels that we defined as meeting greater than or equal to 80, bonus greater than 60 units sold, and greater than or equal to 80 for revenue. Now, how many had at most 50 units sold? Well, how can we do that? Well, let's show you another way to use count if. So here we used count if and we just referenced a cell. Count in the range if you see the word bonus. Well, that worked. Can we define it with numbers? At most 50. Well, let's try that. Count if, what's our range? Now we're going in units sold. So let's select cell B3, shift control down. And remember, to shoot back up quickly, I can hit the F4 key and then just undo this absolute reference, hit F4 key a few more times for each cell. So you should have equals count if, parenthesis, B3, colon, B202, comma. Now what's the criteria? Well, the criteria is at most greater than or equal to 50. But if I type in parenthesis, not parenthesis, I'm sorry, quote, at most 50, quote, watch what happens. It's telling me there aren't any. Well, that's because what it's looking for are the words at most 50. Let me show you. If I change 19 to at most 50, it's going to come up with 1. And it changed my total to 199 because all of a sudden I don't have a number here. So let me undo that, Control Z. It's looking for the words at most 50, so that's not going to work. Let's get rid of that. Let's put the cell at most 50. Will that do it for me? Nope, still, because it's looking for the words at most 50. What we need to do is we need to say at most 50. At most 50 is less than or equal to 50, right? Well, if I hit enter now, it's going to give me an error. Because you see, what I've done is, this is text. Unless we just have a number, Excel is seeing text. I would have to just enter 50. But I'm not looking for just 50. I'm looking for any value up to and including 50. So it has to be entered as text. So what you'll do after your cell reference for your range, you'll press comma, quote, less than or equal to 50, quote, parenthesis. So I've entered equals count if, parenthesis, B3 semicolon B202, comma, and then in quotes, because it's recognizing this as a direction, which is text. It's reading it and saying, okay, I need the value to be less than or equal to 50. How many of them are less than or equal to 50? Actually, there's 154 that are less than or equal to 50. Okay, let's move on to our count ifs plural. And we'll talk a little bit about referencing and then a couple other ifs, some if and average ifs. How do we do plural? Well, plural is when we have more than one criteria. So I want the word bonus, and I want to know how many bonuses are in the southern region, the western region, the Midwest, and the East. Here's how we'll do this. So we have more than one criteria. I'm going to use count ifs, plural. What's the criteria range? The first criteria range. We're going to make the word bonus our first criteria. So let's choose column E here. So choose cell E3, shift control down. And now this time I want you to keep that absolute reference. So use your F4 key, leave the absolute reference on. So you do want the dollar signs in front of both the column and the number because we're going to drag this formula down, comma. What's the first criteria? Well, I want to know if it has the word bonus. So let's type that in. So if we have the word bonus here, comma, now what's my second criteria? Range. My second criteria range is going to be looking for the word south. And the range is here in A3, to shift control down, A202. I'm going to hit my F4 key to absolute reference. And I want that criteria to be the south. Rather than typing, let's just use G11. I could have used G6 for the word bonus, but I didn't do it like I do, so we get the same results. And again, like I said in lecture, this isn't the only way to do this. This is just one way. So I am going to hit the parenthesis, I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to see there weren't any bonuses in the south. Now watch what happens if I drag the formula down. I do have my 9 total bonuses, and where they are in the West and the Midwest, right? So what's happening here, if I look at my cells, is because we absolute referenced our ranges, they didn't move, right? We didn't do any reference for the word bonus. It's just the word bonus. But I can see that it was good that I didn't reference the second criteria so that then it would move down. So it's very important when you do this that you make sure that your referencing is correct. Let me just show you what would happen if I didn't have the referencing on my criteria here for column E. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to move down, and I have different answers. And the reason for that is check out what happens here. See the blue region move down. I don't want that to happen. Here, it moved down again. Here, move down again. I want to stay put back up in here from E3 to E202. So the way to do that is to have that absolute reference turned on. So E3, I need to hit the F4 key. E202, I need to hit the F4 key. What you need to have to get your full credit is equals count ifs, plural, parenthesis, E3, semicolon, E202, absolute referenced, comma, the word bonus in quotes because it's text, comma, and then A3 to A202 absolute referenced, comma, and then G11, and don't reference G11 because as we drag our formula down, we want the next formula to search for the word west, and the next formula to search for the word Midwest, and finally, the last formula to search for G14, the word east. So what I need to do is I need to, now that I've put that absolute referencing back in, I need to drag it down so that I correct that error. And there I have my 9 bonuses. Now, what's the relative frequency? How do I get percents? Well, the relative frequency would be how many bonuses out of the total, right? So I would say, okay, well, what's the numerator? Well, there's 0 bonuses in the south divided by the total, which is 200. Now, if I don't do any referencing and I enter here, what's going to happen when I drag my formula down, I'm going to have some errors because now it's taking 5 divided by cell H5, which doesn't have information in it. So divided by nothing, as we know, we can't do in mathematics. Divided by 0 is undefined. It gives me an error. Here, it used 4 divided by 9. Here, it used 0 divided by 154. That's not what I want. I want everything divided by 200. So I need to throw that absolute reference in around H4. So hit your F4 key for that absolute reference, and then drag your formula down, and you'll see you'll get your percentages. 5 out of 200 being 2.5%. 4 out of 200 being 2%. Let's change those to percents. Highlight them, go up to percent, and now we have our percents. One of them was 2.5, so let's increase the decimal. There we go. Now, what's our total revenue? What's the total revenue in the South, in the West, in the Midwest, and the East? And what's the average revenue? Similar to the count if function, but this time we're not doing plural. We're just doing one criteria, and that criteria is the region. We're going to use SUMIF. Now, what's the range, the criteria, and then the sum range? So let's see how this works. So for the range, what we'll do is we'll say, okay, what is the range that contains the criteria? Remember, the criteria we're looking for is the word South, West, Midwest, or East. So the range that has that criteria is found here from A3 down to Shift Control down, A202. I'm going to go ahead and F4 that so that now I have that range, and it will stay put as I move my formula down. What's my criteria? Well, that's here in G11. I am not going to reference that because I want it to move down accordingly. And then what's my sum range? In other words, where are the numbers that we want to find the sum of? Well, we want revenue. So let's go C3, Shift Control down to C202, absolute reference that because I want it to stay. I don't want it moving down as I move my formula down. End my parenthesis, hit enter. So in the southern region, the total revenue is just over $2,180. Drag the formula down. And we now have the sum of all of our regions, the West, the Midwest, and the East. Now, if your numbers aren't matching mine, make sure that you used your absolute referencing on both your range and your sum range. If you didn't, then what's happening when you move your formulas down, you'll see that these purple and blue regions move down, and you may lose out on certain values. If I were to look at the revenue, the sum of the revenues is just over 15,000. So I'll hope that actually the sum of my totals here should match, right? And they do. 15,011.55 cents, it matches, so looks good. Now, likewise, I can find the average for each specific region. That's where we need an average if. So average if, and again, what's the range that contains the criteria you're looking for? The criteria I'm looking for is the different regions. The range of the regions is here, A3, Shift Control down to A202. Use that F4 key both to pop you back up into your cell, and because we actually do want absolute referencing right now. What's the criteria? It's the specific region. Where is the data that you want the average of? Where's the numbers? Well, that would be revenue again. C3, Shift Control down to C202, F4 to absolute reference. End this out. Drag it down. And now we have the average for each specific region. What's the overall? Oops, sorry here. Let's find the sum of the averages. We get 303, so will that work if I take then the average of everything? No, of course not. I don't want to take the sum of the averages. Actually, I'd want to take the average of actually, wait, what am I thinking here? Mathematically, that doesn't make sense. What we're doing here is when we're taking the averages here, we're taking the average of all of them. So I'm sorry about that. That just mathematically didn't make any sense. Disregard that. So here what we're doing is we're taking the average of just the southern region. We're taking the average of just the western region, the average of just the Midwest, and the average of just the East, so I can't quantify that to match over here with the overall average. Okay, so one thing I would do if in a table, because this is money, this is revenue, I'd put my dollar signs in. So I just add the dollar signs. I have the dollar signs for my average revenue already. Now let's create a Pareto chart based on, let's see. Let's do this based on the overall average for each region. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our regions and highlight them. We're going to hit the control key and then highlight the average revenue. And actually go back. Let's take, let's do that. Take our regions. I'll show you what happens. Take our regions, the control key, the average revenue. Now let's go up to insert, go to recommended charts. And a Pareto chart is a bar chart. And notice how they already automatically in Excel 2016 give you that cluster, that column chart as a recommended chart. So let's say okay. Now these are not percents, so I wouldn't put a pie chart there. Go ahead and as it says here, place your Pareto bar chart here. A Pareto chart is a bar chart for, it says qualitative data. Now, the idea here is we're looking at the southern region, the western region, the Midwest region, and the eastern region, which those values are qualitative. And we have to have these in descending order, which actually, luckily right now, we already do have these in descending order. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to show you how to do that. So right now, leave it as it is. You can see highlighted. We have the revenue field. We have the regions. It looks good. Let's change this though. Let me show you how to make some changes on your chart. With your chart highlighted as it is, that just means I've chosen the chart. Let's change this to be revenue, total revenue instead of average revenue. So just put your cursor on what you see as the blue fields right now and move it over. Notice if I move down, the purple moves down as well because that's defined as our horizontal axis. So let's use this for total revenue. And you see your chart change. Isn't that nice? So now this change for total revenue, the thing here is, what's happening is this is no longer a Pareto chart because it doesn't go in descending order. So how can I make this a Pareto chart? Well, what we'd have to do is we'd have to sort the data. It can be troublesome to sort data when you just try to sort in a field. If I were to just right click here, I'm in cell J11 and I right click and I go to sort and I go largest to smallest, it wants to know, are these all merged? What do I do? Just X out of that. Don't do that. Here's what we're going to do. Grab from your region across and down so that you have highlighted all of cell G10 down to K14, and I want you to make this a table. So I want you to press Control and then T for table. Notice the dancing ants around your data set. That means it's selected G10 to K14, which is exactly what we want. And yes, our table has headers. Headers are the names of each of your columns. If you're going to create a table, you want first to have a row of column names, which Excel calls headers. Say OK. And now, what a beautiful skill to have. You have data that's in table form so that you're not going to screw anything up if you go and try to sort. Watch, I could sort my regions alphabetically. Everything sorts. It's sorted here in my chart as well. I can undo that, Control Z. Let's just take our total revenue and sort largest to smallest. Look at that. It sorted at largest to smallest. It didn't mess anything up. It didn't change anything. If you make a table, you get your filters. I could look at just one value at a time if that's what I wanted to do. Control Z to undo that. I could sort smallest to largest if that's what I wanted to do. I could sort the average revenue field. But at the end, how I want you to leave this off, I want you to have this sorted largest to smallest so that we have a Pareto chart. And this should now be a table. And again, to do that, you can rewind the video. All I did was select the data and pressed Control T. Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac is your table function. Now, to finish this off with our Pareto chart, what I want to do in a Pareto chart, what we often don't have is we often in a Pareto chart will have our grid lines, or our grid lines will be deleted. So just highlight your grid lines. All I did was place my cursor on one of them and hit the enter key. I can delete them, just backspace, that deletes them. And actually, often in a Pareto chart, we don't need the axes, so I'm going to just delete this axis. So select it until you see it's selected the entire vertical axis, and again, you can backspace and delete it. Our chart title, you don't ever want a professional graph to say chart title or graph. Let's say, how about the West leads in total revenue? Very active title. We can change just one of the bar colors. If you select the bars, so here we go. I'm going to select in the white space there. Select the bars, it'll automatically select all of them. Select the first one again, and now you have just this first bar. Let's make this stick out by making it green. And we can see the West leads in total revenue. Now, one more thing, how much does it lead by? We can add the data values. So now, again, select one of your bars, and it'll automatically select them all. If you want a specific bar now, you have to select, again, that specific bar. So, okay, I'll go back, select all the bars, right-click, add your data labels. Now I have the dollar amounts. So the West leads in total revenue, and I have a nice clean Pareto chart. Here's what I don't want to ever see anybody do. It's never a good idea to take this chart that you have here and in your design tab to think that for some reason this is preferred. In the professional sense, I realize that if you're on an internship or you're working for a company, you may have some bosses that want your charts to look this way. The glitz and the glam, take it away and keep your charts simple. You do not want to have the dark background. First of all, if you go to print this, often if you don't have a color printer, it's not going to come out as nice. This looks terrible. Even this doesn't look good. People think that more color is better. In actuality, the plainer, the better. This is a professional Pareto chart, preferred over this. Do not have the black background, the gray background, the neon colors. Avoid the neon. Just make a professional, crisp chart. Okay, last piece is the pie chart. How are we going to create a pie chart? Well, a pie chart should only be used for relative frequencies. In other words, percents. Here's our percents here. So if I'm going to make the pie chart, I'm going to select my percents, hit the control key, select my regions. I'm going to go up to insert. I can even just go to the pie chart. I have a pie chart here, or I could go to recommended charts, and pie chart's one of my recommended charts. But the idea is it says only use if the categories total 100%, which in this case, we have 2.5% and 2%, right? We have only 5 and 4. So we're not totaling 100% here, and we have 0 and 0. So what would happen here to make this work? Well, you see, the problem occurred way back when we did our formulas for the bonus relative frequency. What we should have done, so I'm going to click off of this graph. Actually, here, let me move it. Oh, moment there. There we go. Move it down here. Pan out a little bit. There we go. What happened is back here, when I enter the formulas, I took 5 out of all 200. If I want my percent, see, the time to use a pie chart is when your totals are 100%. We don't total 100% here. We total 4.5%. So what I want is I want my bonuses out of all possible bonuses. So I want to change this 200 to the 9 that we see here. So here in cell where am I? I11. In cell I11, make sure that you drag your 200, the H4 cell to be H6. Let me hit enter. Let me zoom in on this and show you what I did. So I basically took what was placed here at 200, H4, and just took that red and moved it down to H6. Now I hit enter, and because it's a table, it automatically updated it for me. You'll see I didn't even need to drag it down. Now I have my 100%. Now, something else I would like you to do, and that's just technically, even though it worked out, I wanted you to see that even in the pie chart, you technically have the same pie, right? But what I'd like to do is make the pie chart look a little better. We're not going to really use a pie chart very often. With two categories like this, let's make a change. Okay. Let's change things up a little bit. And because I have everything referenced, this is going to work great. So you're going to see the power of referencing right now. Back out one more time. Okay, what I want you to do is let's change what designates a bonus. A bonus was more than 60 units sold and revenue of at least 80. Let's make a bonus more than 50 units sold. Change it to 50. Leave everything else the same. Hit enter. Double click to populate, and look how everything else changed, including our chart, because everything's tied together. So rewind that if you want to see that again. But all I did is in my first cell, I changed what was a 60 to a 50. I hit enter, and then in the bottom right corner, I double pressed to bring the formula down to all of my cells. You can see we have 50 now. And then automatically our bonus frequencies update, our number of bonuses update, our bonus relative frequencies update, right? We have 10 out of 19. 10 out of 19 gives me over 53%. 7 out of 19 gives me over 36%. And our chart updated as well. So now let's make a professional chart here. Let's say that, let's see, who leads in bonuses? It looks like the West region, of course. As the Western region is leading in total revenue, they're also leading in bonuses. Let's change the chart title and say the West leads in bonuses. Okay, now, one other thing to show you about a pie chart. When you do a pie chart, you want to minimize white space as much as you possibly can. So what I might do here, follow along, move over a little bit. You can see when you hover your cursor over the pie chart, you get these options. I'm going to take the legend here, and I'm just going to move it to the top. I'm going to take my chart, I'm going to highlight it, but then I'm going to move just outside the chart. I'm going to make my chart a little bigger. So you know what? I'm going to move the legend to the right. Let's do that. Let's move the legend. I think it'll look better there. This is somewhat subjective, but I like it there. Now, one more thing that you can do is you can put your labels on. Then we can just get rid of this legend, right? So let's try that. Let's uncheck legend altogether. We need to have some sort of legend. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the data labels. Click data labels. Move over more. Let's put them on the call out. We'll call them out. And when you put the call out, you'll even get the regions in there. So now, maybe I want to make my click outside. Now, how I can click outside and get the box around is I clicked inside the pie, and you can see the pie is highlighted. Now, if I click right outside the pie here, I can then make this a little smaller now. I could move my title a bit over. And now I have my graph, my pie chart, that gives me some information about each region. Again, avoid going to that design tab and thinking that a black background looks better, because it just doesn't. Okay, undo, Control Z. Okay, that's it. For the If tab, That's what you should have. So make sure you have your graph looking similar to mine. Make sure you have your callouts. Make sure you have converted to a table. You can rewind this video to double check everything. Now in the lookups, let's finish up with the lookups. So in the lookups, what we're going to do is first we're going to autofill numbers. I'm going to show you if you create a pattern, 500, 501, 502, you can continue that pattern. Just double click and Excel will know to continue this unique number all the way until, in this case, 725. You can also autofill patterns. If you start a pattern, F12, F2Q, F3Q, double click, it will continue the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, as you see here. Just a little tidbit for you. Now what we have here are individual students by section and scores, where some individuals don't have a score. So I'm going to show you the if error function. If error would be if there's no score. We want to enter a 0 if the student hasn't taken, we'll call this a quiz, the quiz. So we're going to use if error, another if statement. If error, if what's an error? Well, if there's an error in this cell, C2, then I'm going to have it put 0. Student receives a 0 if they didn't take the quiz. So if error, put 0. We could do something like no score, but then we need it in quotes because that's text. So let me show you what that looks like. Now, the idea here is this should have came back if error, value if error. Oh, you know why? Because it's not seeing it as an error, it's seeing it as an X. That's right. So what we would need to do is we'd need to actually have an error in here. So let's change this. If error, value if score. All right. What we'll do instead is we'll put an error here in the X category. And we'll do that by, and I saw it here and didn't do it, we'll do that by embedding with the round function. So what we're going to do is we're going to use round. You can see that some of these scores are not rounded to whole numbers. So we're going to put the round function out in front of if error. So let me start it all over again. Here we go. Equals round. We want to round the number and we round it to no digits. We'll start it this way. Round the number, round it to no digits. Now I hit enter. So that's what you should have here. Round the value to no decimals. That means to a whole number. If I put a 1, that would mean to 1 decimal place, 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places. But a 0 means the nearest whole number. I hit enter. Now I'm going to get that error. There we go. So now we have our errors. But I don't want the error to be there. So if there is an error, then I want it to put a 0 for a score. So we're going to round, but if there's an error, then we're going to put a 0. So how do we embed that? Well, we're going to use if error. And what we want to do is we want to round C2 to the nearest whole number. But if that produces an error, put a 0. So for all the students who have an X, we should now get a 0. There we go. So the student who has an X here, we have a 0. The student who has an X here, we have a 0. Now the way to quickly sort that you just learned, put your cursor anywhere in this table, because this section, columns A through I, are what we call contiguous. They're all one right next to each other. I can see there's no hidden columns, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. And then there's a break. Because there's a break before we get more data, if I put my cursor in here, and I can, let's go down and make sure our rows look contiguous. It looks like there's no breaks in my rows. Looks good. We're going to find out, because if you go anywhere within this data set and now you control T, look at that, A1 to I227, which is the bottom of the data set at 227. Yes, my table has headers, and again, that just means it has column names. Hit OK. And now we have a table that we can sort. It made things a little big because of the column names, so just grab your column names, grab your columns, and make them smaller. See, we can also make this one smaller here, right? There we go. And these, my comments, just kind of exploded out on me. If you want, you don't have to. You can move your comments back. I'm going to move mine back just because I need to be able to see them, know which one I'm using for you guys. Okay, so now what I could do is I could look at all the scores, right? And I could say, well, let's filter these. Let's do smallest to largest. Okay, well, what if we did largest to smallest? Oh, there's my students who had my X's. They do have a 0. And I can sort, and it's not going to mess everything up. It's in a table. I could sort any way I wanted. I can go back to sorting my students by smallest to largest, and then I have the same values. So for sake of formulas, what I would like you to do is make sure that you end up the same as I do. So in your last sort, if you're playing with this table, make sure in your last play of your last sort, you grab this filter and go smallest to largest so that what you have now looks exactly like what I have. Okay, now let's talk about what the VLOOKUP does. We're going to run through these, and we'll get more practice with these through the semester. So VLOOKUP is a vertical lookup. The vertical lookup, it literally looks up vertically a value and then gives the result. The problem with the VLOOKUP, and you can read about what it is here, I have that in the comments, is that when you do a VLOOKUP, the value that you're looking up has to be in the first column of your array, and the data has to be in ascending order, meaning going from smallest to largest. So let's see how this works if I don't have that. So right now I don't have any order. I have 90, 65, 0, 80, 70, A, D, F, B, C from the grades for the grade ranges. Well, let's look up the student's grade based on the quiz score. Now, we can see here that a 65 should earn a D, a 78 should earn a C. Well, let's do a VLOOKUP with a false command and see what happens. So you can tell the difference. VLOOKUP with false. Lookup value is what's the thing you want to look up. The thing I want to look up is the grade. Now, because this is a table, it's going to come back with the at, round, if, error, meaning for the entire table. You know what? Back out of that for me, please, and just type in D2. Okay, so we're going to look up D2. Please type in D2. Look up D2 just so you can understand, because before it was giving you a table reference. Look up D2. Where's the table? Where's the thing you want to look up? Oh, let's try in here. We're going to look this value up. Now, you know about referencing. If I move this formula down, this red region is going to move down. So I don't want this table array to move down, so I'm going to automatic reference that. So automatic reference is my F4 key, absolute referencing. Then where is the resulting column? So I'm looking up, the thing I want to look up is in column D, that's the grade. Well, here's the grade. In which column of this array is my result? Well, the result's in the second column. The grades are in the first column. The result's in the second column. So 2. Now for range lookup, you're going to use true and false. Similar to when we did the binomial distribution, false is for an exact value. True is a cumulative total. False means I need to find the score exactly in this data set. So let's try false, because that's what I want you to do for this column. So what you should have is exactly as I have, equals VLOOKUP parenthesis D2 comma K3 semicolon L7 with the absolute referencing, comma 2 comma false, enter. Because it's a table, it will automatically do the updating for you. So you don't need to double click because we have a table. And what's happening here is you can see it did move down to D3, but we stayed put in our array. Looks good. Check out another one. We have all these errors. The reason we have errors is false looks for the exact value. It says, hey, is 65 in here? Yep, I found 65. It's a D. Puts a D. Hey, is 78 in here? Oh, I don't find 78, so there's an error. Is 98 in here? Oh, can't find 98. There's an error. Is 90 in here? Yeah, 90's in here. Give it an A. All right, there's your A. And you get the idea. That's what the false command does. Now, don't fix it. Leave it that way. Let's look at what the true command does. So do VLOOKUP. And again for me, just type D2. we're going to look up D2. Where we're going to look it up is going to be in this in this array of information. And we're going to change it though. We're going to hit F4 to absolute reference. We're going to result with the second value, and we're going to put true this time. Here's what's going to happen. It's saying that 65 is an F, 78 is an F, 98 is a C. Something must be wrong. Well, what's wrong is the VLOOKUP will fail if you don't have your array data in ascending order. So what I want you to do is double click in your cell F2 again to get your formula back, and I simply want you to move this array over and then expand it. And now that we did that, we have the thing we want to look up, which is the quiz score, in the first column. The second column we don't really need. And the result is now in the third column. So I need to enter a 3. If I put false, I'm going to have the same problem I had in column E. It's going to look for an exact value. It's not going to find 78 here, so it's going to give me an error. It's not going to find 98. It's going to give me an error. But when I put true, I'll explain what happens. So you have VLOOKUP, parenthesis, D2, comma, M3 to 07. Make sure you have that semicolon, meaning you're in the entire array with your absolute referencing, comma 3, because now where the result is in the third column, comma true, enter. It's a table, so you don't have to drag it down, although you can. And now you see the grade you would expect. A 100 is an A, an 88 in this situation, 88 is a B. Let's see, a 42 is an F, and it's working. Now, if we had put false here, it wouldn't work because it would just look for 65 or 78. So what is Excel doing to get this C, for example? Excel's starting at the top and saying, okay, I need a 78. I have 0. I can go another row down. 65, that's not yet at 78. I can keep going. 70, that's not yet at 78. I can keep going. 80, oops, 80 is too much. Back up. I'm going to give it a C, which it did. Same thing here. We'll pick another value. We'll pick the 90. Actually, we'll pick the 88 here with a B. How did it get an 88 to B? Well, it started here at 0 and said, okay, I need 88. I can increase to 65. I need 88. I can increase again. 70. I can increase again. 80. I can increase again. 90. Oops, 90 exceeds. Back up. The VLOOKUP gives me a B. Again, it's a vertical, up and down, a vertical lookup. And when you do a vertical lookup, it starts from the top of the array you choose. So it starts from the top and works its way down. And you need to make sure that your data is in increasing order. Otherwise, your VLOOKUP will fail. Okay, the HLOOKUP is very much the same, with the exception that the HLOOKUP goes a horizontal lookup. Again, you need to increase in value. Just like here, vertically, we increase in value. The only reason this array worked for us at all was with the false lookup, and even then we failed because we couldn't look up all of our values. So the false command is typically only used when you want to return a value that you know all the data set is included in your array. The true command is used with ranges, as you see here. So how do we use the HLOOKUP? Very similar. You spell it right, first of all. Here we go. Very similar with the exception that, so the lookup value is in D2, so hit D2. Because remember, if you just go over here, you're going to get that table notation. That @ symbol just says we have a table, and the column we're in is round if error. That's what that means. Let's get out of that and just D2. Now, we don't want to pick this entire array because the score we want to look up, just like in the VLOOKUP, had to come in the first column. It has to be in the first row. So if I did that and hit my F4 key to make sure I stay put, and then said my grade is in not the first row, not the second row, but the third row, and use the true command, because again, I'm not going to find the exact values. I'm going to find that range and hit enter. You see I get a bunch of errors. That's because it says, hey, I can't find 65 where you started me off. It's looking in the first row, where here it looked in the first column. So you have to say, okay, well, let's change this. There we go. So the first row would be the numerical values. And because of the true command, we don't need an exact. That's what you should have for your formula. You hit enter. And I have a reference here. What did I do? Look up, HLOOKUP, HLOOKUP D2. I'm looking up D2 in K11 to O12. Oh, not the third. There's no longer a third column. No wonder I have a reference here. There's no longer 3, right? There's only 2 rows. So I need to make this a 2. 2 and then true. Enter. There we go. And we can see we have matches now. Both of these formulas worked for us. Now, there's other functions, and the only beauty of the lookup, so the HLOOKUP works when your data is in rows. The VLOOKUP works when your data is in columns. The beauty of the lookups, we use lookups when you don't want to worry about inserting columns, because you see the VLOOKUP is great, but if I insert a column, watch this, if I take, you don't have to do this, just watch. If I click in column O, right click, and insert, I want you to keep your eyes on what's going to happen in column, let me see, in column F here. So I'm going to insert, and column F completely changed. Because remember, what column F was doing is looking up this array and looking up the third column. But now I need the fourth column. So the problem being there, I'm going to undo that, Control Z. The problem being there is the VLOOKUP is great, but if you start inserting columns or inserting rows into your data set, your VLOOKUP or your HLOOKUP will fail. Well, what the lookup will do is the lookup will actually not worry about that because you're going to pick columns. Or the other issue with the VLOOKUP and the HLOOKUP is that you need to have that exact match in the first column, and you need to think about what column the result is in, right? So in the VLOOKUP, we need to have that match in the column, first column, and then we need to count over the number of columns. Well, a plain lookup in the form of the thing you want in an array, here's the advantage of this. So watch. If I enter lookup, just lookup, what do I want to look up? I want to look up D2. Where do I want to look it up? So I get 2 different lookup functions. Let's do this one first. Just enter the array. The array is going to be here. I'm going to hit F4. I'm going to hit enter. And I have errors, of course. Why, of course? Well, the reason I have errors is, remember, the thing we look up has to be in the first column. Here it's in the third column. So let's fix that a little bit. Let's just change these. F, D, C, B, A goes in order. So let's just take our numbers, copy, go ahead, and we're going to paste them here for a minute. And I'm going to copy these, Control C, paste, Control V. And then I'm going to copy cut these, Control X, paste them here, Control V. Look what happened to my lookups. Populated great. Because that's just to show you that what you're choosing, and you have to make that change or it won't work. So you have to do as I did. You can rewind. I just did some copying, pasting. Control C is copy, Control X is cut, Control V is paste. What's happening here is I needed to have the thing I'm looking up, the quiz score, in the first column. Now here's the beauty of a plain lookup. In a plain lookup, you don't have to enter which column your result is in, so that if I were to insert, shift the cells to the right, okay. If I were to insert a column, look, it didn't change my lookup. But if I do that here, insert a column, in the VLOOKUP, it now gives me the ranges because it's giving me the third column, remember. I'm going to undo that, Control Z, Control Z. Okay, I'm going to undo it here as well. So that's an advantage to the lookup formula that's just look up an array. Look up an array. Now here's what it does though. You have to understand that with look up an array, it's always going to give you what's ever in the last column for your result. So in other words, if I had, I don't know, hi, hello, bye, you don't have to do this, just watch, goodbye, and okay. And then I took and expanded my choice here, I'd have all my words. See, it's always going to give you from the first column of the thing you're looking up. You have to have the thing you're looking up in the first section of your array, the first column. It doesn't care how many columns are in between. It's always going to result with the last. That's actually a nice alternative to the VLOOKUP if you know your data might change, if you might add columns to your data set. I'm going to undo this. And again, you didn't have to do any of that. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. There we go. So you should have in your lookup the same formula I do. Okay, the very last one, and then we're done with our video. We're just over an hour, but there's so many great skills in this video, is the last type of lookup. You saw that there were two lookups, and in the second version of the lookup, that's the first one here, this is awesome because you just pick your lookup vector and result vector. It's even better than the lookup prior. So you get your lookup value. I'm going to look up my quiz score. Oops, forgot. We're using D2, right, to be consistent. Look up D2. And now what's the lookup vector? Not array, just vector. Where's the score I want to look up? Oh, it's here. That's the score I want to look up. Make sure you absolute reference, comma. Where's the result vector? Where's the result vector, not array? Oh, it's here. Look how awesome that is. Hit the F4 key, parenthesis, enter, bam. See, they all work. Whether you use a VLOOKUP, an HLOOKUP, a lookup with an array, or a lookup with vectors, we're going to get the same result. It just depends on which one works best for you. If you know you possibly are going to be inserting columns into your data, I would tell you to avoid the VLOOKUP. Because the problem with the VLOOKUP is if you insert columns, your VLOOKUP is going to fail. What you might want to do is opt for either the lookup with the vectors or the lookup with the array. The lookup with the vectors works great. The other beauty of the lookup with the vectors is you don't need to you don't need to count the columns. If you do a VLOOKUP, you need to count the columns. And imagine that this array is 20 columns wide. What a pain that would be. Well, then what I might do is go to the plain lookup and just grab my information and know that 20th column would be my last column of information, or just do a plain lookup. Now, the disadvantage, there is a disadvantage to the lookup formulas. The disadvantage to the lookup formulas is there's no false command. They're both only the true command. So if you need an exact match, you're going to want to use, as it says here, the VLOOKUP. So that's the downside. There's pros and cons to these different types of formulas. If you want an exact match for the false, where you would have used the false command in the VLOOKUP, don't try either of these formulas because it'll fail on you. The false command is only available with the VLOOKUP, as you can see. The false command, that's that range lookup. It's in the VLOOKUP, and then it's, again, here it is, the range lookup. It's in, of course, your HLOOKUP. Basically, the HLOOKUP is just the VLOOKUP turned on its side. Tilt your head sideways, and you have an HLOOKUP. Okay? So that brings us at about an hour and 10 minutes. But hopefully an hour and 10 minutes of some great skills. Like I said, what's very important is that at every level you have the same formulas I do. So let me go back in really 1 minute and just show you the different formulas that you should have. Let me zoom in. Make sure yours are the same. Ready? Here we go. The formula you should have exactly in cell D3 and then copied down to the rest of your cells here. Be cognizant of spaces and characters, the formula you should have in cell E3. And again, copied to the rest of your cells in column E. Again, keep mind of referencing. I don't have any referencing in columns D or E. In cell H4 here, the formula you should have, there's no referencing. And again, if you used referencing there, it wouldn't be wrong, But again, we're just trying to be consistent, so we all do it the same. The formula you should have in cell H6. The formula you should have in cell H7. You need that less than or equal to 50 in quotes. Then you should have turned the array from G10 to K14 to a table. And then the formulas that you have, here's the formula in column H. Make sure you have that absolute referencing. So another one of the cells in column H. One of the cells in column I. And a couple of the cells in column J. Don't forget that absolute referencing and your range and your sum range. Again, the quick way to obtain the absolute referencing is the F4 function 4 key, and then lastly column K. Remember, you need your charts, nice white backgrounds, nice active titles. You took your grid lines off, you changed the west to a green bar. This is a Pareto chart. It's in descending order. We have our data labels on. We have our pie chart that has our data callouts. Looks better. We have our active title. And then, oh, and remember, for your Pareto chart, in order to have that descending order, you want to make sure your total revenue is sorted largest to smallest. That's how we obtain the Pareto chart here. And then lastly, in the lookups. In the lookups, the first thing we did was continued our pattern, 501, 500, 501, 502, etc. We did F1, F2, F3. We changed this to a table as well, but then we had to do some column width adjustments. And again, to make more than one column width adjustment, I can just select all the columns. And again, to do that, I just click D and drag it across. And I can just make these guys smaller. Okay, and then as I told you, if you want to read more about each one of the lookups, you can just find the comments here. These are just insert comments. All I did here was right click, and I inserted a comment. I can edit it, delete it, or hide it as well. But here's your formula. So for column D, you should have if, error, your rounding. Remember, C2 in column D. And then all the rest of your columns here deal with D2. And you want to have that D2. You have your absolute referencing. That's your false command. For the true command, again, based on column D2, our absolute referencing in the third column with a true command. With the HLOOKUP, we're again looking up the cell D2, this time from K11 to O12. It's important. And the second row, I'd forgotten originally to change that to 2, remember? And the true command again, because they're not exact lookups. And then lastly, our two types of lookups. The first type, which is the array type, where the lookup looks up the value in the first column and returns the value in the last column based on a true command only. And then the vector lookup, where what the vector lookup does is it looks up a value in a vector and gives the resulting vector. Okay, that's it. Congratulations, you guys. Hopefully you have built those Excel muscles. Now go drink a glass of water and hydrate. Goodbye.